I stood in my kitchen that Tuesday morning, the one with the chipped yellow tiles and the coffee maker that gurgled like it was auditioning for a horror movie. My hands were wrapped around a mug of coffee, black, no sugar, the way I'd been drinking it since I turned 40 and decided life was too short for cream. The rain streaked down the window, blurring the world outside, and I was lost in that hazy space between awake and dreaming when I saw it. The text. It wasn't even 7 a.m., and my phone buzzed on the counter like a wasp trapped in a jar. I glanced at it, expecting a work email or one of those spam messages about car warranties. But no. It was from Brian, my husband of 12 years, the man who snored like a freight train and still made my heart skip when he smiled. The message was short, 3 words that hit me like a brick through a windshield: I saw her again. Her. I didn't need a name. I knew exactly who her was. Jessica. His first love. The one he'd dated in college, the one he'd cried over when she left him for some trust fund kid with a yacht. The one I'd spent years convincing myself was just a ghost in his past, a faded Polaroid tucked away in a drawer. But ghosts don't text back, do they? My stomach twisted, a slow, sickening churn, like I'd swallowed something sour. I set the mug down too hard, and coffee sloshed over the rim, pooling on the counter. I stared at the phone, my breath shallow, my mind racing. Again? What does again mean? When was the first time? The questions clawed at me, sharp and relentless, but I didn't text back. Not yet. I just stood there, the rain drumming louder now, and felt the first crack splinter through the life I'd built. I'd always known Jessica was a shadow in our marriage. Brian had been honest about her early on. Too honest, maybe. He'd told me how she'd broken his heart, how he'd spent years piecing himself back together before he met me. I'd laughed it off back then, 29 and fearless, flipping my hair and saying, well, her loss is my gain. But now, at 42, with crow's feet creeping in and a mortgage to pay, it didn't feel like a gain. It felt like a trap. That's when I noticed the time. Brian would be home from his night shift at the hospital in 20 minutes. He'd walk through the door, his scrubs wrinkled, his dark hair mussed, and he'd kiss my forehead like nothing was wrong. Could I look at him and pretend I hadn't seen that text? Could I sip my coffee and ask about his patients while my insides screamed? No. I couldn't. The crack was there, and it was spreading. Have you ever had a moment where one small discovery changed everything you thought you knew about someone? How did you handle it? Hit us up on the Whispers Story channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The next few days were a blur of pretending. Brian came home that morning, kissed me like always, and mumbled something about a rough shift before collapsing into bed. I didn't ask about the text. I didn't trust my voice not to crack. Instead, I went to work at the library, shelving books and smiling at patrons while my mind churned like a storm cloud ready to burst. I kept replaying that message. I saw her again. It wasn't just the words, it was the weight behind them. Why tell me? Was it guilt? A confession? Or worse, was he testing me, seeing if I'd bite? I'd always prided myself on being the cool wife, the one who didn't nag or snoop. But cool was starting to feel like a synonym for clueless. By Thursday, I couldn't take it anymore. Brian was at the gym, and I was alone in our house, the silence pressing in like a heavy coat. I grabbed his laptop from the coffee table. His password was still Rangers 1994, the year his favorite team won the Stanley Cup. I told myself I was just checking our bank account, but my fingers had other plans. I opened his email. And there it was. A thread with Jessica. Not one email, not 2 but dozens, stretching back 6 months. My heart thudded in my chest as I scrolled, the screen glowing like a spotlight on my unraveling life. They weren't steamy love letters, thank God for that, but they were intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. He'd written about missing their late-night talks, about how she got him in a way no one else ever had. She'd replied with memories of their college days, little inside jokes I didn't understand. The latest one, sent 2 days ago, said, Seeing you at the coffee shop felt like coming home. Coffee shop? When? Brian hadn't mentioned any coffee shop. He'd said he was grabbing takeout last weekend, but now I pictured him sitting across from her, laughing over lattes while I folded laundry at home. My hands shook as I closed the laptop, my breath coming in short, jagged bursts. I wasn't angry yet, not fully. I was hurt, yes, and confused, but mostly I felt stupid. How had I missed this? I'd been so busy juggling work, bills, and the occasional girls' night that I hadn't noticed my husband slipping away. Or maybe I'd noticed and just didn't want to see. That night, I lay in bed next to Brian, his breathing steady while mine was a mess. I stared at the ceiling, the shadows twisting like my thoughts. I could confront him, demand answers, but what if he lied? Or worse, what if he didn't? What if he said, "I still love her," and walked out the door? I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. So I decided to dig deeper. I'd find out everything, when they met, where, why. And then I'd figure out what to do about it. Sometimes we ignore the red flags because we're scared of what's on the other side. If you've ever had to dig for the truth, what kept you going? Share your story with us on the Whispers Story channel. By the weekend, I was a woman on a mission. I'd spent hours cross-referencing Brian's emails with his work schedule, his credit card statements, anything I could get my hands on. It was like I'd turned into one of those true crime podcast hosts, piecing together clues with a manic kind of focus. And I found something. Last Saturday, he'd spent $12.47 at Brew and Bean, a little coffee shop 20 minutes from our house. He'd told me he was picking up Chinese food that night, but the receipt was timestamped at 3 p.m., hours before dinner. I Googled the place, and my gut sank. It was cozy, trendy, the kind of spot you'd meet someone for a catch-up, not a quick takeout run. I needed more. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I tracked his phone. We'd shared our locations years ago, back when it felt romantic, not creepy. Sunday morning, he said he was heading to the hospital for an extra shift. I watched the little dot on my screen move, not toward the hospital, but toward a park downtown. My heart raced as I grabbed my keys and followed. The park was busy, families picnicking, dogs chasing frisbees. I parked a block away and spotted him on a bench, his head bent over his phone. Then she appeared. Jessica. I'd seen her in old photos, but in person, she was striking. Tall, blonde, with a laugh that carried across the grass. She sat next to him, too close, and they talked for an hour. No kissing, no touching, but the way he looked at her? It was like I didn't exist. Driving home, I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wasn't just hurt now, I was furious. This wasn't a one-off. This was a pattern, a secret life he'd built behind my back. But I wasn't ready to confront him. Not until I had a plan. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and a notebook. I wrote down everything I knew, everything I felt. Then I started plotting. I'd meet Jessica myself. Not as Brian's wife, but as someone else, a stranger, a friend, whatever it took. I'd get inside her head, figure out what she wanted, and use it to take back what was mine. It was risky, maybe crazy, but sitting still wasn't an option anymore. Have you ever had to outsmart someone to protect what matters to you? What was your game plan? Drop us a line on the Whispers Story channel. I'm dying to know. It took me a week to track her down. Jessica worked at a boutique PR firm downtown. I found her LinkedIn after some late-night sleuthing. I created a fake email, posed as a potential client, and booked a consultation. My hands trembled as I typed, but my resolve was steel. Tuesday afternoon, I walked into her office, my hair tucked under a scarf, sunglasses perched on my nose. I told Brian I was running errands. The lie felt bitter, but necessary. Jessica greeted me with a warm smile, her voice smooth as honey. Up close, she was even more intimidating. Polished, confident, the kind of woman who never doubted her place in the world. We sat in a sleek conference room, and I fed her my cover story. I was launching a small business, needed PR help. She nodded, scribbling notes, completely unaware of who I was. My pulse pounded as I steered the conversation, dropping hints about my personal life. A husband who worked too much, a marriage that felt stale. I watched her face, searching for a flicker of guilt, but she just smiled and said, "I get it. Sometimes you need a spark to feel alive again." That's when I knew. She wasn't just reminiscing with Brian. She wanted him back. The realization hit me like a slap, but I kept my cool, nodding along as she pitched her services. Then I went for it. "What about you?" I asked, leaning in. "Ever reconnect with an old flame?" Her eyes lit up, just for a second before she shrugged. "Once or twice. It's hard to let go of something that meant so much." I wanted to scream, to flip the table and demand she stay away from my husband. But I didn't. I thanked her, shook her hand, and left with a plan burning in my chest. That night, I waited until Brian was asleep and slipped his phone from the nightstand. I texted Jessica from his number, "Meet me tomorrow, same place. We need to talk." Then I deleted the message from his sent folder. My hands shook, but my mind was clear. Tomorrow, I'd be there instead of him. Confronting someone can feel like walking into a fire. If you've ever had to face the person threatening your peace, how did you find the courage? The park was quieter the next day, the sky gray and heavy with the promise of rain. I sat on the bench where Brian and Jessica had met, my coat pulled tight, my heart hammering. She arrived right on time, her blonde hair catching the dull light. She froze when she saw me instead of him. "Jessica," I said, standing up, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I'm Brian's wife." Her face went pale, then red, a flush creeping up her neck. She stammered, I didn't know you'd be here." "I bet you didn't." I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers. "I know about the emails, the coffee shop, the park. I know you've been chasing a man who's already taken." She opened her mouth, then closed it, like a fish gasping for air. Finally she said, "He reached out to me first." "I didn't." "Don't," I cut her off. "Don't play innocent. You knew he was married. You didn't care." The air between us crackled, thick with tension. Then she surprised me. She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You think I'm the problem? Brian's the one who can't let go. He's been miserable with you for years. He told me." Her words sliced through me, deeper than I'd expected. I wanted to argue, to call her a liar, but a tiny, traitorous part of me wondered if she was right. Had Brian been unhappy? Had I been too blind, or too privileged, to see it? Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, the wind whipping at my coat. I'd come to scare her off, but she'd turned the tables, planting a seed of doubt I couldn't shake. Have you ever confronted someone only to end up questioning yourself? How did you sort through the mess? I didn't tell Brian about the park. Not right away. I went home, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames. Jessica's words echoed in my head, but so did something else, a quiet, stubborn voice that said, "This is my life too. I'm not giving it up without a fight." The next morning, I called in sick and spent the day thinking. Not plotting this time, but reflecting. I thought about the early years with Brian, the late-night talks, the way he'd held my hand through every setback. I thought about the woman I'd become, stronger, yes, but maybe a little too comfortable, too quick to assume we'd always be okay. When Brian got home, I was waiting in the kitchen, 2 mugs of coffee on the table. He looked tired, wary, like he sensed something was coming. I didn't yell or cry. I just said, "We need to talk about Jessica." His face crumpled, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the man I'd married, vulnerable, flawed human. He admitted everything, the emails, the meetings, the pull of nostalgia. He swore it hadn't gone further, that he'd been lost, not unfaithful. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice breaking. "I just didn't know how to tell you I was struggling. I could have walked away then. Maybe I should have. But I didn't." I looked at him, at the life we'd built, and decided it was worth saving. Not just for him, but for me. We talked for hours, raw and real, about what we'd ignored, what we needed. It wasn't a fairy tale fix, but it was a start. Jessica faded into the background after that. Brian cut contact, and I stopped checking his phone. I'd taken matters into my own hands, not with revenge, but with something harder, honesty. And in the end, I found a strength I didn't know I had. Thanks for listening to My Husband's First Love Derailed My Marriage, so I took matters into my own hands on the Whispers Story channel. If this story hit home, or if you've got your own tale of love, betrayal, or badassery, subscribe now and join our community. We're here to whisper the stories that matter. Marriage isn't always fair, and neither is life. If you've had to fight for what's yours, what did you learn about yourself along the way? Tell us on the Whispers Story channel. I can't wait to hear your voice.